Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, a year ago this week, Nigeria witnessed widespread protests against police brutality, and in particular, an end to a notorious police unit known as the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS. They accused the squad of violating human rights and engaging in extrajudicial killings. From across the world, international stars like John Boyega gave their support to the movement. And here in Nigeria, popular figures like the writer, performance poet and lawyer Dike Chukwumerije joined the protesters in calling for reforms. Protests were held not just in Nigeria, but across the world, including London, Berlin, Toronto, Atlanta and New York. Many young Nigerians saw the campaign as a fight for their generation and used social media to amplify their demands for good governance and an end to corruption. But how have they managed to capture that anger and to channel it towards more lasting political change? Well, to help us assess the EndSARS protests 1 year on, I'm joined now in the studio by the writer, lawyer and performance poet Dike Chukwumerije. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Charles. Always a pleasure.
What do you remember of that period? How did you sort of get into it? Because I know that eventually you did some writings in that direction, which inspired some people.
I mean, it was a very exciting time, to be honest, because you saw this very inspiring movement on the streets. So there was a lot of excitement in the air, like, something new was afoot.
I suppose for you,
Yeah.
I mean, you had written so much about this thing,
Yeah.
not so much that people should go on the street, but about the need for change.
Yes.
That to see it take form, I mean, that
Yes.
must have been something.
It was very exciting for me, particularly the character of the movement, the fact that it cut across ethnic and regional lines, and it was focused on governance. For me, it was very exciting to see the beginnings of a mass movement focused on putting pressure for better governance, which I believe really is what would unlock the future for
Absolutely.
Nigeria. So it was very exciting for me to watch, albeit from the sidelines, and writing about it. It was an exciting time for me.
Yes, and when you say obviously from the sidelines, I mean, you didn't go out to protest, but what did that protest mean to you? And I mean, what I mean to you in terms of your work and how you then incorporated that into your work?
For me, it validated many things I've been saying for many years. So those who say that Nigerians don't exist, that Nigeria is an artificial identity, that the Nigerians don't exist. It was evident, it was proof, that it is possible to have a socio-political movement that is not based on ethnicity or religion, and that is focused, that where Nigerians are united by their being victims of a common culture of bad governance, and are united by a desire to see better governance, which is what the foundation of a civic society is.
Absolutely.
So for me, it was validation that it's there. It may be amorphous, it may be uncoordinated, but it's there. So for all those reasons, intellectually, ideologically, I found it very exciting and still do, because that energy is still there.
Well, we'll get to that energy because that's an important element as Nigeria heads towards elections and all the rest of it. But, I mean, did it really change anything in Nigeria?
I think it did. It may not have changed. I mean, for one, the government made concessions to that movement.
Well, they made one concession.
Yes, which is important because many times progress is incremental. I mean, one of the reasons why the Japanese are so far ahead of the rest of us is because of their culture of continuous improvement. You make a little change consistently, and before you know it, you're a long way ahead. That's one. And then two, like I said, it shook the government. The government was taken aback by it. It took them unawares. And again, that's the sort of strategy, the sort of movement you need to get ahead of the curve. Your rival can't really see you coming. If they can predict what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, then they're going to always be able to checkmate you. So it was
The
enterprising, yes,
was
and innovative and dynamic, which is the sort of thinking you need to bring to the table lead social change.
But in a sense, that also affected the movement itself, because I was talking to Deji Adeyanju yesterday, who was one of the people who started the call for EndSARS, over a year ago. And even they were taken by surprise at the kind of the energy that suddenly, hit the streets. And nobody quite knew how to channel that energy.
Yeah, because everybody, we all took for granted the narrative that these types of Nigerians don't exist. Everybody takes it for granted that it's not possible. So everyone was taken aback by it, and it sort of erupted. Because, like I said, the exciting thing for me is that it's like oil. It's there. We don't quite know how to tap it, how to drill it, how to harness this energy, but it's there. And because we are not very familiar with movements like this in Nigeria. Movements are usually regional or ethnic based. We're not really familiar how to ride this horse. It affected the movement in terms of leadership and structure and things like that. But we learn from experience. If we can retain the learnings from what happened last year, then whenever it happens again, we'll be able to perform better. Because the objective is to push the government to become more competent, to become more respectful of human rights, to deliver results. That is the end point. A more responsible, a more competent, a government that is more respectful of human rights.
But there's no doubt in your mind that it touched a lot of people across Nigeria. Because, when you looked at this, it wasn't just, it was mostly young people, but a lot of other people in different age brackets also joined.
It cut across generations. It cut across region, it cut across ethnicity, it cut across religion, which is amazing, which is absolutely fantastic. And it shook the government. It made it pay attention, which is also an amazing thing, a very important thing.
In a country like Nigeria.
In a country like Nigeria.
But do younger people feel that show of strength and the protests and the calls for good governance still speaks to them a year later and speaks for them?
I think there's a lot of, in the aftermath of the movement and how it was sort of deconstructed and attacked and crushed, there was a lot of broken hearts and a lot of despair and a lot of, it's never going to work. Disillusion, and that's understandable, but what I always try and tell people is that social change is not easy. It's not a walk in the park.
Absolutely.
It's never, it takes time, just before I came here, I was doing a bit of research on some other things and was just reading up about the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa, 1976. And to see the young people who were killed in their numbers protesting against apartheid. And it wasn't until 14 years later that Nelson Mandela walked out of jail.
Absolutely.
This is the reality of social struggle, between the time the slaves were at the end of the Civil War in America and the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, over 100 years.
So you've got to stay the course.
You have to stay the course.
Yeah.
It's going to cost you, but the greatest thing you need is perseverance. It's not going to be one battle, it's going to be a series of battles.
I agree with you, but I suppose a characteristic, I don't know if it's unique to Nigerians, but a characteristic of a lot of people in Nigeria, irrespective of their age, is impatience.
Yeah.
They want things to happen right away, which is one of the reasons things like education, people are becoming less enamored of education. They don't want to go through the entire thing and learn for years and years. They just want to get out and make money.
That's correct. And many things have changed about the modern world, but some things will never change. There's never going to be a Snapchat revolution. There's never going to be a Twitter revolution. Revolution is never going to be done in a click. It's always going to be done the way it's always been.
It's going to be analog.
It's always going to be analog. Yeah. It's always going to be, getting one person to agree and the next person to agree. It's always a slog.
That's a very, very
so it's something that
analysis.
It's very important. This is something I feel that the older people can contribute to movements that are led by younger people, to bring a bit of realism, to the reality of social change and struggle. When, as a young person, you're out on the street and they're passing water and drinks and you're dancing, you may think, it's cool, it's fun, but revolution is never cool and fun. It's always bloody.
Especially when the bullets start flying.
When the bullets start flying. And at that point, you're going to realize that you need courage, You need doggedness, you need perseverance, you need that capacity and willingness to give it all. You know, to give your life just to make an inch, to gain an inch. You give your life to gain an inch. You know, so if you think of a Nelson Mandela, 27 years of his life he spent in jail.
Extraordinary.
We say it very easily, but 27 years, break it down to minutes and hours.
Absolutely.
And days and weeks and months, and the sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Having not seen his children and all that. This is the reality of social struggle. So I feel sometimes, you know, as a slightly older person, when you're speaking with young people, we need that energy, the energy of the young, but we also need people telling them the truth about what the path to social change really is, that it's going to be long.
But isn't that where people like yourself come in? You're a very popular figure. You're a performance poet. You're a writer. You're a lawyer. You've ticked all the boxes in terms of what people, you know, the hard work people put in to become successful. And you have become celebrated. I mean, people have tried to read a deeper meaning into these protests beyond people protesting against a situation and a set of people who oppressed them. Is there an end-SARS ideology of sorts that's emerged? Because, of course, such an end-SARist ideology would rely on artists like you to articulate it, wouldn't it?
Yes, I was just going to say that you sort of answered the question for me, because it lies to the intellectuals, the artists, the creatives to flesh out that ideology. What started as what looked like a spontaneous movement, to give it a structure as a way of thinking. And that is why I began by rooting it in the fact that it proves that there is a demographic that exists within Nigeria today that can carry a modern Nigeria forward. Because change has to be rooted in a demographic. It can't exist in the air. It has to be rooted in people whose success as people is tied to the success of the nation. For the sort of people that protested in EndSARS, they need Nigeria to be meritocratic. They need Nigeria to be modern. They need Nigeria to be democratic. That's the sort of Nigeria that group of people needs to flourish. So their existence, their survival is tied to the modernization, the democratization of Nigeria. And that's what you need. You need a group whose survival depends on changing Nigeria for better.
That's an absolutely riveting analysis. Please stay with us, because we want to hear from you some more. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead as we remember the EndSARS protest 1 year on with the pioneering performance poetry artist Dike Chukwumerije. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, my current guest is the celebrated spoken word and pioneering performance poetry artist Dike Chukwumerije, who, it is fair to say, has made a name for himself in Nigeria with his political rhymes and poetical works. And he was there, of course, a year ago to lend his voice and his art to the yearnings of Nigeria's youth as they took to the streets demanding good governance and a change of direction in this country. The main objective of the protest, the notorious police unit known as SARS, was disbanded, but it wasn't enough to get the protesters off the streets, who demanded an action plan to reform the entire country. Well, that didn't happen, but there are calls for the many who took part in the protests to come together in strength and register to vote in the 2023 presidential election. And Dike Chukwumerije is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. And has there been a lot of discussion since among sort of young people about the path Nigeria is taking? Is there a clear articulation of what they want to see happen in Nigeria, especially as 2023 approaches?
I think there are discussions in groups going on and inspired by the protest and by other issues. I think there's a lot happening in many micro groups that gives you a lot of hope. Whether those efforts are able to scale up into a fairly formidable sort of mass movement we shall see, but there is a lot going on.
But is it up to, arguably, the politicians, for example, the new breed, if there's any such thing, politicians, because there's a lot of noise being made in different circles, but for them to try and harness that strength?
Yes, there is that. There are different elements to the ultimate struggle. I mean, the base of the element is to build a cohesive movement around the pursuit and desire for better governance, a cohesive movement that is self-conscious and self-aware about what it's about. And that's the most important thing. It's whoever becomes the politician that takes advantage of it. It's not as important as the force behind.
Right,
Politicians
I see what you mean.
have no power in themselves. It's about the social force, the socio-political force backing them. So if you're able to bring 1 million people to the ballot box or 2 million people to the ballot box, then you have relevance on the political scene, you see. But you have to build that capacity to deliver 2 million votes. You may never see the people behind that machinery who sort of operate as the kingmakers. But being that kingmaker is more important than being the face and saying, I want an office.
But I wonder if that protest movement itself has thrown up any potential leaders that people like you and lots of other people could believe in. I mean, are there leaders who stood out for you in that movement? Because every movement like this, usually in other parts of the world, tends to throw up people who become more prominent by either their, the persistence with the movement, their ability to articulate the aspirations of the movement, and all that sort of thing.
I mean, you already mentioned Aisha Yusufu, for instance, who really came to fore in the movement, showed a lot of courage, which is very important in the struggle for social change. You need courage, so she's there. And there are many others like her who came up in the movement. But the problem sometimes is that for many Nigerians, we have a defeatist attitude to these things. We look at people and say, this person will not even win, so why bother backing them? So you also have to interrupt that way of thinking. It is always important to give it a go. It's always important to try. It's always important to put your money where your real convictions are. Not sort of compromise even before the battle has started.
That's
I don't think I'm going to win, so I'm just gonna back the person I think will win. So this
even though that person doesn't tick the boxes that I want.
That I need ticked. And the person who ticks the boxes, you say this person is still far out, it's too marginal. But if you don't back the marginal force, they'll never ever be contenders for power. So we have to play that long game and be patient and be true to our convictions. I've met too many people who say, look, I really believe this, but there shouldn't be any buts. At this point, you should have the courage, the strength of your conviction.
And which is why you've got things, I'll give you an example in the UK, you've got the Conservatives, you've got Labour, and then you've got the Liberal Democrats. And the Liberal Democrats have never really won any election, but you find people who are committed, drawn into their philosophy and their ideology, and they stick with it.
And they stick with it. And I mean, a couple of years back, the Liberal Dems were, they had this...
they had a coalition.
With the Conservatives. But even that coalition came from decades of people sticking with that ideology, So it's important, and they are there. They may never produce a prime minister, but they are a swing vote that can affect which way the government goes. So it's important that people that have certain convictions, stand where they feel convicted about, even if it means standing out in the cold for a while. So I feel it's a thought process that has to be interrupted, because you keep hearing it over and over again. Oh, this person is good, but they can't win, therefore I'm gonna, Look, if there's an election in 2023 and you don't win, but your group is able to deliver 1 million votes, you immediately become a factor. You didn't win anything. You become relevant. Because the parties that win are looking at that 1 million that you can guarantee on election day, and they'll be willing to, you get a seat at the negotiating table. So every vote you bring in matters. It makes you relevant in a democracy. Votes are power.
That's a very important point.
So this is very important to stick it out.
Absolutely. So what would you say is the legacy of the EndSARS protest movement 1 year on?
For me, the greatest legacy of the EndSARS movement is the demonstration that the people can hold their government to account, and that That's one, and that people, Nigerians, young Nigerians, have evolved enough to unite strongly on issues beyond ethnicity, religion, or region. You know, for me, those are two strong legacies of the EndSARS movement that I'll always carry in my heart and I'll always refer to. Because for me, that's the future right there. That a Nigerian can look at another Nigerian and say, you know what, there's no light in my house as well. There's no water in my house. I've been looking for a job for 3 years. I took my dad to the public government hospital. The doctors were on strike. You're my brother. You're my sister, regardless of where you come from. Because we are suffering the same socioeconomic privations, and we can stand together and fight it.
Yes, but as far as you're concerned, the world of young people has not become easier as a result of the EndSARS protests. And we've got about a minute.
No, it hasn't. We're still facing a shortage of jobs, shortage of opportunities. Most importantly, the lack of an enabling environment. It doesn't matter how hard things are, but if you have an enabling environment that allows people to flourish. Nigerians are very rugged and resilient by nature. You know, they can solve their own problems. But sometimes you feel like the government gets in the way, you know, even makes things harder. So you need a government that understands, like a good gardener, how to let things grow and flourish. Right. So young Nigerians are still dealing with that toxic policy environment.
Well, thank you very much for your analysis and for your insights. Dike Chukwumerije, the performance poet, writer, and lawyer. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja and the UK. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.